Have you ever walked away from a conversation with someone, feeling as though something intangible was taken from you, something you can't quite put your finger on? Not your time, not your attention, but your power. The kind of power that's not measured by words or actions, but by the silent exchange that happens beneath the surface. It's a feeling that's hard to describe, yet it lingers, gnawing at you long after the conversation has ended. And what's even more unsettling is that you might not have noticed it happening at all until it was too late. Now, what if I told you that this exchange, this loss, wasn't some anomaly, but a profound insight into how power truly operates in the world? What if in that silence there's a hidden power, one that speaks louder than any words ever could? It's a paradox, one that Nietzsche understood deeply. Silence, often dismissed as weakness, is in reality one of the most potent forces in human dynamics. And it is in the control of this silence, in the ability to remain unshaken, that true power emerges. We are taught from a young age that the force of speech, the volume of our words, the clarity of our arguments, is what determines our strength. The louder we speak, the more we are heard. But Nietzsche, with his piercing insight, turns this idea on its head. He argues that the most powerful individuals are not those who shout to be noticed, but those who understand the subtle strength that lies in the spaces between words. Power, he suggests, is not about the force of speech. It's about the mastery of our own reactions, especially in the tense moments where others expect us to engage, to react, to give in. Imagine standing in the midst of a storm, emotionally charged, ready to escalate, yet choosing to remain calm. Not because you are indifferent, but because you have the strength to control yourself, to remain unshaken by external chaos. That, Nietzsche would argue, is where true power lies. It's in the presence you bring to the table, not the words you offer. The man who can remain silent in the face of provocation, who does not need to react in order to be seen, becomes an enigma. And in this mystery there is influence. This, then, is the paradox that beckons us to look deeper. What we often dismiss as passivity is, in fact, the most active form of strength. It is in mastering silence, not in avoiding confrontation, but in choosing not to engage in the emotional games that pull us away from our center, that we begin to unlock our true power. The presence that comes from this silence is not passive. It is filled with meaning, with intention, and with control over the self. As we explore this paradox, we step into a deeper truth, one that calls us to recognize that real influence doesn't come from words or actions alone. It comes from the strength of our presence. And so, I invite you to stay with me, to open the door to this hidden power, and to explore how silence, far from being an absence, is a presence that can shape the world around you. You've probably heard it before, somewhere deep within the currents of modern culture. True power comes from speaking up, from making yourself heard, from proving your worth. We live in a world where words are currency, where the loudest voice in the room is often mistaken for the most powerful. But what if the real power, the kind that holds weight and depth, comes not from shouting your presence into the void, but from the quiet, controlled stillness that lives within? What if true strength lies in your ability to master yourself, to stand unmoved, untouched, in moments of chaos? Nietzsche, that profound and often misunderstood philosopher, proposed something that cuts deeper than the usual claims of success and dominance. He who cannot be silent will never be powerful, he seems to whisper across the ages. The paradox lies in this. Silence, often seen as weakness, is in fact the most potent force you can wield. The true power doesn't lie in making others listen, but in the ability to stand firm in the midst of noise, to remain silent when the world screams for a reaction. It is in silence that you find yourself. And in finding yourself, you unlock the deepest power that lies within. When the world expects you to react, to defend, to explain, the one who chooses to remain still is the one who has transcended the need for validation. It is here, in that profound quietude, that true dominance begins. It is in your ability to control not only the world around you, but also your own inner turmoil, your impulses, your emotional chaos, that you find sovereignty. When you no longer need to justify your existence, when you no longer need to be understood by others, you begin to live life on your terms. This mastery is unsettling to others, because the world is not accustomed to someone who doesn't react, who doesn't fall into the trap of seeking approval. People who are driven by emotional needs, whether it's validation, recognition, or love, are easy to manipulate. They are predictable, vulnerable, tied to the whims of those they seek to please. But the man who stands still, the one who remains grounded and unshaken, becomes a force of nature that no one can control. His silence, which others might perceive as indifference or weakness, is in reality the most formidable power there is. It is the power of self-mastery, of emotional independence, and of unshakable presence. By embracing silence, you take back control. You cease to be a puppet to the emotional tides that others so easily manipulate. When you withdraw from the emotional games, from the desperate need to chase approval, you begin to live a life free from the constraints of others' expectations. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer need to be the loudest in the room. Instead, you become the presence that quietly, yet decisively, shapes the room around you. Your worth is no longer defined by the validation you receive. It is defined by the strength with which you hold your ground in silence. And that is true power. This shift, though subtle, is profound. It transforms not only how you interact with others, but how you see yourself. The silent man is not a man of inaction, but of profound action. Action that comes from the deepest core of self-control, from the wisdom of knowing that true strength lies not in reacting to the world, but in controlling how you respond. And in that, you are free. Free from the need to be understood, free from the chains of emotional manipulation, free to be the person you were always meant to be. Power is not something to chase. It is something to embody. And when you become the embodiment of self-mastery, when your presence alone commands the space around you, you will realize you have not only mastered your external world, you have mastered yourself. There is an unspoken truth in the dynamics between men and women, one that goes unnoticed by most, but is sensed by all. We often hear that women are manipulative or that they wield power through words. We are told, time and time again, that emotional games are their domain. But what if this perception is completely backwards? What if the real source of power in women lies not in their words, but in their presence, their energy, and their ability to control the emotional flow of a relationship? Nietzsche, ever the visionary, seemed to understand something deeply profound about the nature of power in relationships. He believed that women, far from being passive, are in fact masters of a subtle and almost invisible game. They don't wield their influence through loud declarations or physical force, as men often do. No, their power lies in their ability to command the space between words, to regulate the emotional dynamics without uttering a sound. A man, particularly one who believes that power comes through assertiveness, who strives to dominate through physicality or verbal force, will soon find himself overwhelmed by this silent strategy. The more he tries to impose his strength, the more he will fortify her position. It's a dance of energies, a game of subtle shifts and unspoken understandings. The man who pushes too hard, who tries to control through force, simply plays into the hands of the woman who understands the deeper currents of emotion at play. His attempts at dominance instead of establishing power only strengthen her ability to shape the emotional landscape. This is the unseen game, the emotional battlefield, where dominance isn't declared with words but is felt in the silence between them. It is here that women, whether consciously or unconsciously, exert their influence. They don't need to dominate verbally. They need only to be present, to understand the unspoken language of energy and emotion. And when they do, they have the ability to shape how others perceive them, how others feel, and how others behave. It is not about playing tricks, It is not about manipulation. It is about mastering the space between people. A woman's emotional intelligence, her ability to read and influence the unspoken dynamics, often goes unacknowledged because it is not as obvious as the forceful commands or visible power dynamics that men often resort to. Yet in its subtlety, it is far more potent. And so, for the man who seeks to master himself in relationships, the lesson here is clear. Power doesn't lie in reaction or in physical force. True power comes from understanding the emotional landscape, the dynamics at play in every glance, every gesture, every silence. It comes from recognizing that those who control the energy between them are the ones who hold true influence. This is where many men go wrong. They think that strength lies in the visible, in the loud, in the obvious. They think that dominance is about commanding attention and subduing others. But real strength, as Nietzsche might say, is in the ability to read the hidden patterns, to understand the subtle influence that shapes every interaction. And in this realm, the true masters are often those who don't need to speak at all, for their presence is enough. In mastering this silent strategy, one does not become weaker or submissive. Rather, they become the masters of themselves. They understand the invisible forces at work, the emotional currents that shape the world around them. And in this knowledge, they find their own power, one that cannot be manipulated, one that does not seek to dominate but to understand and command the space without a single word. There's a peculiar power in the act of stepping back, a force that is often misunderstood. In a world that tells us to chase, to assert, to never back down, the act of withdrawal is seen as weakness. We are conditioned to believe that to win, we must engage fully, to pour our energy into every interaction, to fight for attention, for recognition, for love. But what if the greatest strength a man can possess lies not in his ability to engage, but in his ability to withdraw, when to pull back, to detach, and to remain unmoved in the face of emotional chaos? Nietzsche, in his vision of the Übermensch, Overman, offers us a radical rethinking of power and strength. He argues that the ideal man does not chase after validation or crumble at the weight of emotional demands. He does not react impulsively or desperately seek to be understood by others. Instead, he practices withdrawal, not as a tactic, but as a principle. It is an art, the art of knowing when to step away and preserve your integrity, of recognizing that true strength is not in what you pursue, but in what you can afford to leave behind. This withdrawal is not a form of punishment, nor is it a manipulation. It is not about playing emotional games or trying to make someone else chase you. It is about choosing to rise above the endless cycle of seeking approval and emotional entanglements. When you withdraw, when you refuse to be drawn into the emotional traps that others set for you, you are asserting your emotional sovereignty. You are reclaiming the power that comes from not being dependent on anyone else's approval or emotional responses. The more a man practices this form of detachment, the more desirable he becomes, not through force or physical dominance, but through his ability to remain emotionally sovereign. People are drawn to him not because he chases them or panders to their needs, but because he is stable, calm, and centered. His presence commands respect simply because he is not driven by emotional neediness. He is not rattled by conflict or emotional turbulence, and it is in this tranquility that his true power lies. Withdrawing, in this sense, is a form of inner strength. It is the refusal to be emotionally manipulated, to be controlled by the whims of others. It is a decision to stand firm in your own sense of self, to not be pulled into the chaos of external validation or approval. It is in this detachment that a man becomes free, not just from the need for constant recognition, but from the emotional traps that others set for him. He does not need to play the game to win. He simply chooses not to participate in it. Nietzsche's Übermensch embodies this detachment. He is not swayed by the expectations of others, nor does he seek to bend others to his will. His strength lies in his ability to rise above the need for external validation, to live according to his own principles, free from the constant tug of emotional demands. The true mark of power, then, is not how much one can control others, but how much one can control oneself, how much one can choose to remain steadfast, unbothered, and unaffected by the emotional tides of the world. In practicing this art of withdrawal, a man becomes more than just a participant in life. He becomes its master. He moves through the world not as someone who is at the mercy of others' opinions or emotions, but as someone who understands that true power is the ability to remain undisturbed, to let things come and go without being thrown off course. And in that calmness, in that refusal to engage in the constant dance of emotional dependency, he becomes the one who truly holds sway over his own life. It is here, in detachment, that we find true emotional sovereignty. Not through force, not through confrontation, but through the quiet strength of standing firm and choosing to remain unaffected by the emotional traps that seek to ensnare us. This is the art of withdrawal, and in it you will find the true power to live your life on your own terms. It's a cycle that feels almost invisible, yet its effects are pervasive. We move through life seeking validation, constantly trying to prove ourselves worthy, acceptable, loved. It's a human desire, one that we're told to cultivate from an early age. Seek approval, gain acceptance, and you'll find happiness. But what if this seemingly innocent pursuit of approval is, in fact, the very thing that keeps us chained to others' expectations, continually sacrificing our true selves in the process? In relationships, particularly, the craving for approval creates a deep vulnerability. Men, in particular, often fall prey to this unconscious need, believing that they must constantly prove their worth to others in order to be accepted, to be loved, or to be seen as valuable. This need to perform, to demonstrate your value, slowly erodes your emotional power. You become a puppet in someone else's emotional theater, always reacting to their cues, always chasing after their praise, and in the process, losing sight of your own sense of self. The act of constantly seeking approval is, at its core, an emotional trap. It makes you susceptible to manipulation because your emotional well-being becomes dependent on others. When you need others to validate your worth, you lose the ability to validate yourself. You become tethered to their opinions, their judgments, their reactions, and in that dependency, you forfeit the one thing you should always maintain, your sovereignty. This craving for approval, while deeply ingrained in us, weakens us. It creates a kind of emotional fragility that leaves us open to being influenced, to being controlled. When you are constantly trying to prove yourself in a relationship, whether it's with a partner, a colleague, or even a friend, you position yourself as less than. Your emotional standing becomes tied to how well you are perceived by others, how much you are accepted by them, how much you are valued. You give away your power piece by piece, sacrificing your autonomy in exchange for emotional security that is never truly yours. This cycle is a dangerous one. It keeps you stuck, locked in a pattern of seeking external validation, chasing after the approval of others, and never quite feeling like you measure up. But the truth is, no amount of approval will ever make you feel whole. No amount of validation will fill the emptiness that comes from living outside of your own truth. It is only by breaking free from this cycle, by resisting the urge to seek validation, that you can begin to live a life of emotional freedom. True power lies in self-validation. It lies in the ability to stand firm in who you are, without needing to prove it to anyone. It lies in knowing that your worth is not determined by someone else's opinion, that your emotional well-being is not dependent on how others see you. This is not an act of arrogance or indifference to others, but a profound recognition of your own intrinsic value. When you no longer need the approval of others to feel whole, you become free, not only from the expectations of others, but from the prison of self-doubt and insecurity. In seeking approval, we become prisoners of our own neediness. But when we release the chains of validation, we step into our own power. We move from a place of emotional dependency to emotional sovereignty. And in this freedom, we begin to live authentically, no longer dictated by the opinions of others, but guided by our own sense of truth. This is the liberation that Nietzsche spoke of, the liberation from the herd, the breaking free from the chains that bind us to external validation. To be truly free, to experience real power, is to live without the need to prove your worth. It is to stand firm in who you are, to trust in your own value, and to stop chasing after the approval that has kept you in emotional bondage for far too long. Only then can you step into the fullness of your existence, where your worth is unquestionable and your emotional freedom is fully realized. This is not just a shift in mindset, but a radical transformation in how you live and relate to the world. And it begins with the simple, yet profound, act of breaking free from the chains of approval. In a world that constantly tells us who we should be, what we should strive for, and how we should live, Nietzsche offers a radical and profound vision of personal mastery. He speaks of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who has transcended the need for external validation, the one who has freed himself from the chains of societal expectations and personal limitations. To be the Übermensch is not to conquer others, to dominate through force or intellect, but to conquer oneself. It is to achieve a level of personal sovereignty that allows one to shape their own reality from the inside out. At the core of the Übermensch is emotional control. Nietzsche believed that the true man, the ideal man, is not ruled by his emotional impulses or the whims of others. He is not a slave to the tide of external pressures or societal judgments. Instead, the Übermensch is a master of his emotional responses, controlling his reactions to the world around him, and shaping his destiny not by external forces, but by the strength of his inner will. He is not swayed by the opinions of others, nor does he seek to please or dominate. His power lies in his ability to remain steadfast, to remain true to his own values and beliefs, regardless of what the world demands of him. In many ways, the Übermensch represents the pinnacle of personal mastery, the man who has reached the highest form of self-realization. He has transcended the limitations that others place upon him. He is free from the fear of judgment, free from the need to conform, free from the desire to be understood. The Übermensch is not defined by the roles society assigns him. He defines himself, creating his own values, his own sense of purpose, and his own path forward. This idea of sovereignty over one's life is powerful. The Übermensch doesn't seek validation from the outside world. He doesn't play the game of competition or comparison. Instead, he focuses inward, shaping his life according to his own vision and desires. His worth is not measured by how much he is admired or followed. It is measured by how true he is to himself, how deeply he understands and commands his own inner world. His power is not in dominance over others, but in the freedom he gains by mastering himself. The Übermensch is not a person who lives in isolation, avoiding the world. Rather, he engages with it fully, but without attachment or fear. He is not swept up in the emotional chaos of others. He remains unaffected by the shifting tides of social approval or disapproval. His identity is not fragile, nor is it dependent on the external forces that shape most people's sense of self. Instead, it is solid, grounded, and rooted in his own sense of purpose and autonomy. For men, the idea of the Übermensch is a call to transcend the limitations of modern life. It is a call to rise above the constant pressure to perform, to conform, and to compete. It is a challenge to break free from the emotional chains of approval, to live authentically, and to step into a life of emotional sovereignty. To embrace the Übermensch is to become the master of your own life, free from the need to dominate others or be dominated, empowered by your own understanding of who you are and what you are capable of. In embracing the Übermensch, you begin to live not as a follower, not as someone reacting to the world, but as someone creating the world around you through the sheer force of your inner will. You take control of your emotional landscape, shaping it with intention, rather than being swept away by external forces. You stop waiting for permission to live your life, and instead, you take full ownership of your journey. The Übermensch is the embodiment of true power, not the power to control others, but the power to control yourself, to shape your own destiny, and to live authentically in a world that constantly demands you be something other than who you are. This is the true meaning of freedom. The freedom to live life on your terms, without fear of judgment, without fear of rejection, and without the need to please or be validated by anyone else. This is the life of the Übermensch, the man who has mastered his own world. As the video draws to a close, we are left with a final thought, one that echoes quietly, like the reverberation of a distant bell. The silence we have explored throughout this journey is not a strategy, not a tactic, nor a mere tool to manipulate others. It is, in fact, the natural outcome of a man who has fully embraced his sovereignty. It is the silence of a man who has risen above the need for external validation, who no longer seeks approval from the world around him, and who has become so internally strong that the forces of society and the opinions of others no longer hold sway over his life. This silence isn't passive. It is the most active form of power. It is the silence of a man who has mastered his emotional landscape, who has learned to navigate the world without being pulled into the emotional dramas that often consume us. It is the silence of someone who has become whole, someone who understands that true freedom comes not from the external world, but from the depths of the inner self. And it is here, in this silence, that the path to inner freedom begins. But this is not an endpoint. It is only the beginning. The journey we speak of is one of individuation, the lifelong process of discovering and integrating all parts of ourselves. It is a journey that asks us to confront our shadows, to embrace the parts of ourselves we have long suppressed or denied. It is about becoming whole, fully and completely, and in doing so, stepping into a life of emotional sovereignty, of mastery over our own being. The final message, then, is a gentle invitation. It is an invitation to embark on this journey of self-discovery and self-mastery. The silence we cultivate within us is not a place of withdrawal or isolation, but a space for reflection and growth. It is in this quietude that we begin to hear our true voice, a voice that is no longer drowned out by the noise of the world, but is instead guided by the stillness within. It is in this silence that we begin to hear the truth of who we are, of what we are meant to become. And so, as you step away from this video, let the silence linger. Let it sit with you, not as an absence, but as a presence. And in that presence, may you find the courage to continue your journey, one of emotional sovereignty, of personal mastery, and of awakening to the fullness of your own potential. This is not the end. This is merely the beginning of the journey within.